Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Odyssey Recaps Below the Surface Edition. Today we're recapping chapter 24. Emily Wilson has titled this chapter as Restless Spirits. And guys, this is the last chapter. We have reached the end of the Odyssey. But as you'll see, it's a very strange sort of ending. In her introduction, Emily Wilson states that scholars since antiquity have been puzzled by the ending of the Odyssey, because it's an ending that doesn't really feel like an ending at all. I'm going to talk more about this and about what Emily Wilson has to say about endings at the end of my recap, so stick around if you want some more context. But for now, let's dive in. When we last left off, Odysseus, Telemachus, and the two herdsmen had slaughtered all the suitors, piled their bodies outside, and then murdered some slave girls as well for good measure. Odysseus had finally reunited with his wife, Penelope, but had told her that unfortunately he needs to leave again pretty soon and go and do some light piracy and wrestling to replace what the suitors ate. And then he also has to go on one more epic quest to appease Poseidon, the god of the sea, who is still very mad at him for blinding his Cyclops son. This chapter opens with Hermes the messenger god leading the spirits of the murdered suitors down to the underworld. This seems a little strange, as we've just left Odysseus, Telemachus, and the herdsmen sneaking through town to avoid the rage of the families of the dead suitors to go and find his father, Laertes, who has been told has been driven almost mad by grief. And yet we leave this very tense storyline to follow the spirits of the dead suitors. Hermes takes the spirits of the suitors on a journey through the mortal realm to the realm of the dead. And when we get there, they, like Odysseus in Book 11, find the ghosts of some heroes from Troy, specifically the ghosts of Achilles, Patroclus, Ajax, and Agamemnon. Agamemnon is still very bitter about his less than honorable death at the hands of his wife and her lover, and Achilles laments with him, saying that, "If only you had died at Troy and won the glory of your rank as a commander, all of the Greeks and allies would have built a tomb for you, and afterwards your son would have received great honor. As it is, it was your fate to die a dreadful death." This is eerily similar to what Telemachus said to Athena in chapter 1, that if Odysseus had fallen at Troy, the Greeks would have built a tomb for him, he would have won fame for his son. Dying in battle is honorable and can even bring you glory, but dying at home in domestic disputes is a dishonorable end, especially for a hero and a warrior, and it can bring shame and hardship on your family. In a way, this can maybe help provide context for some of Odysseus' actions in the previous few chapters. Honor, both for an individual and a family, is worth fighting and dying for. It is a vitally important commodity in the world of the Odyssey, and a loss of honor can affect a family for generations. For Odysseus, slaughtering the suitors was a matter of honor, but will everyone see it that way? And what about the honor of the slaughtered suitors and their families? But back to the underworld. Agamemnon agrees with Achilles and tells him that he was really lucky to die at Troy, and then describes how glorious Achilles' funeral was. He says, "You lay a hero, magnificent amid the whirling dust, until Zeus stopped the fighting, and the Greeks brought him back to their ships and began the elaborate funerary rites. His mother, Thetis, a powerful sea nymph, came out of the ocean with a retinue of other nymphs and dressed him in clothes of the immortals. Then all 9 muses came and sang lamentations, and gods and men mourned together for 17 long nights and days, after which his body was laid on a pyre, and sacrifices were performed. And after his body was burned, his bones were put in an urn, mixed with the bones of his friend/lover, Patroclus, and then a monument was created for him, and a great athletic competition was held in his honor." Agamemnon ends by saying, "You were so dearly loved by all the gods. You did not lose your name in death. Your fame will live forever. Everyone will know Achilles." And he wasn't wrong, was he? But then Agamemnon turns the conversation back to himself, saying, "As for me, what good was it that I wound up the war? When I came home, Aegisthus and my wicked fiendish wife murdered me. Zeus had planned it." Again, these contrasting deaths give us valuable insight into Odysseus' actions. Achilles died honorably in battle and was rewarded with a fantastic funeral and eternal glory as one of the greatest heroes Greece had ever seen. Glory that can be passed down to his descendants. Agamemnon, however, survived the battles at Troy, only to die dishonorably at home, murdered by his wife and her lover. And again, there's a lot more to that story, so if anyone wants more context, let me know. But the key point is that no matter his actions in the Trojan War, Agamemnon's death has brought him dishonor. It is not the death of a warrior or a hero. In a way, honor is even more important than victory, and an honorable death is worth fighting for. If we consider that the suitors were dishonoring Odysseus with their disrespect of his name, home, and family, his insistence on the need for a total slaughter makes a bit more sense. If he had died fighting them, that would have been a far more honorable death than being murdered by them, which might very well have happened if he had approached peacefully. But what of the suitors, or their spirits? Agamemnon starts talking to Achilles when he notices the spirits of the suitors being led into the underworld by Hermes. He and Achilles rush up to them, and Agamemnon recognizes one of them as the son of an old friend, and he asks what happened to them. He says, "Why have you all come down here to the land of darkness? You were all so young and strong. You must have been the best boys in your town." This really highlights the loss of these young men. So far, we've seen the suitors sort of as like the suitors as sort of a single unit of devouring invaders. But in this moment, we're reminded that they were individual young men with families and loved ones. Emily Wilson points out in her introduction that though the suitors are disrespectful and cruel, they're also very young, and maybe their behavior could have improved with age if given the chance. Although I don't think personally that could have happened for Antinous, but maybe some of the others. Anyway, regardless, Agamemnon singling this one suitor out and being sad for him and his father over his untimely death reminds us that the suitors were people and they had families who were going to be deeply saddened and possibly enraged by their deaths. Agamemnon goes on, asking the suitors if they were on a ship sunk by Poseidon or perhaps attacked by men as they were poaching cows or sheep, or perhaps they were fighting for a city and women. Which, oddly, in a way, is sort of what happened. They were stealing cows and goats and swine from Odysseus, and they were fighting for a woman, Penelope, and in a way, a city, in their desire to take the throne of Ithaca. Agamemnon begs the suitors to tell him how they all died, asking him if he remembers when Agamemnon visited his father when he was a child, while he and Menelaus were at Ithaca trying to persuade Odysseus to join their fleet and sail to Troy. He said Odysseus was reluctant, and that we had to work so hard to sway that man who sacked the city. The spirit of the suitor answers him and says he will tell in every gruesome detail the manner of our death. He says Odysseus had been gone for many years, so he and the rest of the suitors had arrived to court Penelope, who had no wish to marry us, but would not tell us no or make an end. She planned black death for us and tricked us too. He seems, at least in part, to blame Penelope for their deaths. He tells them about her trick with the loom that wasted 3 years of their time, and then tells them how she still hadn't chosen for another year when some spirit of ruin brought Odysseus from somewhere to Ithaca. Then Odysseus and Telemachus planned the murder of the suitors together, and with the help of Penelope, they all laid a careful trap to murder the suitors. The way this suitor tells it, the whole family was working together to take their revenge. He does say that he and the other suitors abused the disguised Odysseus in his own home, and also that Zeus must have inspired Odysseus to murder the suitors, and also that he thinks that another god must have helped Odysseus. But this is all said sort of neutrally and doesn't seem to be like a moral judgment on their own actions, more just a retelling of factual events or an explanation, perhaps, of how easily Odysseus and his few allies killed a veritable army of young men. The suitor's spirit ends his tale, and Agamemnon's ghost answers, though once again he's focused on himself. He tells them that Odysseus is lucky to have a virtuous and principled wife who stayed loyal to her husband. He says that she will be famous forever, and the gods will make sure a poem is written to delight everyone on earth with tales of her and her intelligence. Not, he says, like his own wife, who murdered him, and then he rants about his wife for a bit. And now I am very much on team wife, so I don't feel sorry for him at all. In the words of the Cell Block Tango, he had it coming. But then the story switches back to the realm of the living, and we finally get back to following the main story, where Odysseus, Telemachus, and the two herdsmen are heading to the farm of Odysseus' father, Laertes, who has gone a little crazy with grief. Laertes had a magnificent house and many slaves, all hard-won in battle, but he's not living in splendor and ease as he should be. Odysseus searches for him and finds him alone in the orchard, dressed in dirty rags and working in the garden, wallowing in grief over his missing son, and presumably his dead wife too. When Odysseus sees his father, worn by age and burdened by desperate, heartfelt sorrow, he stops and weeps under a pear tree at the sight. He considers simply running to him and hugging him and kissing him and telling him that his son has finally returned. But instead, he decides to test his father with teasing and abuse, which seems like an extremely odd choice. In her introduction, Emily Wilson points out that this choice may seem cruel to many readers and suggests that Odysseus is addicted to deceit, even when it doesn't seem to serve a particular purpose. And there really doesn't seem to be a good reason why Odysseus does this. He starts off by approaching Laertes and pretending to confuse him for a slave, saying he must have a very negligent master to be so unkept and dirty. He says that he should be treated better, as he's clearly not lazy and is quite old, someone deserving of care. He asks who his master is and says he's come to visit an old guest friend, Odysseus, son of Laertes, who he had generously hosted some time ago in his own home. Laertes answers him in tears. He says that yes, this is Ithaca, but cruel men have taken over here, and that with Odysseus gone and the suitors infesting the palace, the stranger cannot claim the reciprocal guest-friend relationship, as the suitors won't care. Odysseus, he said, would have welcomed him and repaid his kindness and hospitality richly. Then Laertes asks when the stranger last saw Odysseus. He says that they don't know what became of him, whether he was eaten by fish at sea or by birds or beasts on land. He asks more about the stranger, where he came from, and how he came to Ithaca. Lying Odysseus replies and says he will tell the truth completely, and then proceeds to tell yet another elaborate lie. In this version, he is again a prince, this time from a place called Alabas, and it's been 5 years since he saw poor unfortunate Odysseus. The poem says, "At this, a cloud of black grief wrapped itself around Laertes, and he begins to pour ashy dust over his head and sobs." The sight is heart-wrenching for Odysseus, and he abandons his ruse, rushing to his father and hugging and kissing him, calling him father and telling him that he is actually Odysseus, finally returned after 20 long years. He tells his father to stop crying and he will explain everything. Although he's going to have to do it fast because they don't have much time, as I killed the suitors in my house. I took revenge for all the pain they caused. Laertes is unconvinced and asks for proof. Odysseus is ready and shows him the scar on his leg, and then says that he can also tell him exactly how many trees and of what kind grow in their orchard, saying that when he was little, he would follow his father around beneath these trees, and Laertes would tell him all about them. This is enough proof, and old Laertes' heart and legs gave way. He recognized his son. He threw both his arms around his ruthless son, who caught him as he fainted. When he regained his senses, his first words are about the suitors. He seems happy that the suitors have been punished for all the monstrous things they did, but he says, "I am terrified the Ithacans may soon attack us here and spread the news around to all the towns." Odysseus tells him not to worry and that they should all go and have dinner together. So they head off towards the house, and Laertes finally allows a slave to bathe and oil him and dress him in fine clothes. Then Athena comes and uses some of her magic to make Laertes taller and more muscular. He rejoins his son, and Odysseus is shocked to see him looking so much better. Laertes tells Odysseus that if he were as strong as he was when he was young, I would have stood beside you yesterday with weapons on my back and fought with you against the suitors who were in our house. I would have brought so many of them down. You would have been delighted. They all sit down and eat and talk. Some more elderly slaves come in and are shocked and delighted to see Odysseus, running to him and kissing his hands. They are thrilled to see him, and they ask if Penelope knows that he's back and if they should run and tell her that he has returned. Odysseus replies coolly, telling them not to bother. She already knows. Then the slaves all sit, and they all return to their dinner together. Meanwhile, word is spreading through the city of the suitors' dreadful murder, and the townspeople run from all directions to the palace with shouts and lamentations. They find the bodies of the suitors and remove them for proper burial, sending the ones that came from afar home by ship. The mourners gathered in the square, heartbroken. Antinous' father, Eupeithes, inconsolable with grief, addresses the gathered grieving crowd and weeps for his son. He says, "This scheming man, my friends, has done us all most monstrous wrongs. First, he took many good men off to sail with him, and lost the ships, and killed the men. Now he has come home and murdered all the best of Cephallenia being their general area." This shows us how it's not just the slaughter of the suitors that's the issue here. The Ithacans are concerned with Odysseus' leadership in general. He didn't bring back the army or ships he left with, and then when he did return, he immediately slaughtered more of Ithaca's young men, his own people. Eupeithes goes on and tells the crowd that they have to find Odysseus before he can sneak away to another island. He says they must act and that We will be shamed forever unless we take revenge on him for killing our sons and brothers. I would have no wish to live. I would prefer to die and join the boys already dead. We have to stop them escaping overseas." And so the stage is set for another fight to the death. Honor versus honor. Revenge versus revenge. The crowd is seized with pity at the sight of the weeping father. But just then the slave boy, Medon, and the bard, both spared by Telemachus and Odysseus from the slaughter, speak to the crowd. Medon tells them that Odysseus couldn't possibly have killed all the suitors without the help of the gods, and said that he himself saw a god at the massacre, a god sometimes in the shape of Mentor, giving Odysseus the will to fight and helping to scatter the suitors. The crowd is afraid. Pale terror sees them all, and an old warrior stands up and tells the gathered Ithacans that really this is all their own fault. They knew their sons were doing wrong, stealing from Odysseus and disrespecting his wife, and that he and Mentor had told them to stop their sons from acting so stupidly, but they wouldn't listen. But they should listen to him now. "We must not go and fight," he says, "or we will bring more ruin on our heads." Half the crowd is swayed by the old warrior's words, but the other half agree with Eupeithes and run off to arm themselves and gather in a mass. But the poem gives us another glimpse into the future, just like it did with the suitors, and says, Eupeithes was their leader, to his cost. He thought he would avenge his murdered son. In fact, he would not come back home. It was his fate to die out there. Then we cut to Athena, speaking to her father Zeus. She asks him what he wants to do. Will he make yet more war and bitter strife, or join the sides in friendship? Zeus responds by telling her that this was all her idea, having Odysseus come back and take revenge, and that she can do what she wants. But in his opinion, Odysseus has punished those responsible, and Athena should let everyone swear an oath that Odysseus will be king forever, and then help them to forget the murder of their brothers and their sons, and let them all be friends, just as before, and let them live in peace and in prosperity. Athena's fine with this option, and she heads back to Ithaca. Meanwhile, Odysseus and his family and slaves have finished their meal, and Odysseus tells one of the slaves to just go outside and see if there just happens to be a murderous crowd heading their way. The slave goes and checks and comes back and tells them that yes, a murderous crowd does appear to be headed their way and will be there pretty soon, and that they should probably all go arm themselves. They do, and Odysseus, Telemachus, and Laertes are joined by 9 slaves, and they all head out to meet the approaching crowd. Athena disguises herself as Mentor once again and approaches them. Odysseus turns to Telemachus and tells him, "Dear son, soon you will have experience of fighting in battle, the truest test of worth. You must not shame your father's family. For years we have been known across the world for courage and manliness." Telemachus responds and reassures his father that he will not bring shame to their family. Laertes is thrilled and calls out to the gods, saying what a happy day this is that his son and grandson are warring with each other for achievement. This really underscores just how important honor and image are in the world of the Odyssey, and how shame and honor alike are shared by families. One family member's actions affect the image of everyone in the family. Death is one thing, but dishonor could be far worse. Athena, who has ostensibly come to break up this fight, breathes great energy into Laertes and encourages him to just hurl his spear, starting the fight. Laertes does and kills Eupeithes instantly. Odysseus and Telemachus charge the crowd and hack away at their own people. The poem says, "They would have killed them all and made sure none of them could go back home. But Athena spoke. She calls out and says, 'Ithacans, stop this destructive war. Shed no more blood, and go your separate ways at once.' The voice of a god stops the fighters in their tracks, striking them with pale green fear and making them drop their weapons. The Ithacans begin to leave, but Odysseus let out a dreadful roar, then crouched and swooped upon them. But at this moment, Zeus sends down a thunderbolt, and Athena speaks to Odysseus directly. She says, 'Odysseus, you are adaptable. You always find solutions. Stop this war, or Zeus will be enraged at you.' And so Odysseus stops. He was glad to obey her. And Athena, still disguised as Mentor, makes both sides swear solemn oaths of peace for future times. And that's how our story ends. It feels a bit abrupt, doesn't it? right in the middle of a battle with valid grievances from the Ithacans and no hints as to how exactly Odysseus intends to reunite his kingdom. And with Odysseus having just told Penelope that actually he needs to leave immediately for some more quests. It is a very odd sort of ending. And if we recall, in her introduction, Emily Wilson talks about this. She said that the ending has puzzled scholars since late antiquity. She points out that the poem refuses to offer us a definitive moment at which home and peace are achieved once and for all. Odysseus never sets aside his desire to fight and kill his fellow men, or his yearning to wander and be absent. She goes on to say that in antiquity, there were a number of legends about what happened to the protagonist after the poem ends, alternatives that may reflect ancient recognition of how little the last book wraps things up. She lists a few examples of other alternative versions and endings that existed in antiquity, and there are lots of them, with very different endings and fates for the various characters, and some include new characters, like a son named Telegonus that Odysseus had with the witch Circe. But I wonder if that isn't sort of the point. It's entirely possible that there are parts of this story that we're missing, but there really is no correct version of this story. It's important to remember that this text that we have now is the result of thousands of years of essentially a game of telephone, and also that oral recitations of myths were supposed to change and mold themselves to fit new times and audiences. The written version of the myths that we have now are fantastic to study, and there's unquestionably value in preserving these versions. But I think that we should also be open to retelling these stories in our own ways. If we go back to the very beginning, to the opening stanza in Book 1, the appeal to the Muses ends with this: "Now, goddess, child of Zeus, tell the old story for our modern times. Find the beginning." So yes, this ending may not feel quite like an ending, or not quite right, but perhaps that's because it was never really meant to end. Thousands of years ago, stories were told. Stories of a man named Odysseus, separated from his family by war and fate, tormented by gods and monsters, desperate to go home. The stories were told differently each time, perhaps whispered to children at night, or told loudly around a campfire, or sung at a grand banquet or a wedding. Sung, spoken, and eventually written down, some things lost, some things added, then translated over and over, each time becoming something a little different. I love the poem as it exists, but I think, in a way, it's on its own odyssey through time and through humanity. We're not done telling this story, and I hope that people keep adding to it and molding and stitching it far into the future. I hope we can carry it with us always, because at its heart, it's about something we can all understand: a yearning to go home, to be with those we love, and a refusal to give up, no matter the odds. So that's the end of our Odyssey recaps, and this has been so much fun, and I hope that you've had fun too. Please let me know in the comments if you'd like me to recap anything else. I'm considering doing some recaps of Senecan tragedies, or some ancient Greek plays, or perhaps the Aeneid, or some works by Ovid. So let me know if there's anything in particular that you'd like to see. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.